Hello and welcome to another episode of Father and Joe. I am Joe Rockey here with Father Boniface Hicks. And as I mentioned at the conclusion of last episode, what I wanted to talk about here was effectively in less than a week, the Jews went from celebrating Jesus as God and King and Messiah to chanting "Crucify him," and the whole why that happens or how does that happen so incredibly easily, I think we touched upon some of those influences in the last episode, but I want to dive into a couple of them specifically here because on the surface level, and you guys just heard me last episode talk on the surface level how I kind of misgot the Jesus yelling at the money changers and how it was so much deeper for the mission of God, it's talking as God rather than as a person yelling at industry. How they could convert and switch so quickly. And one of the things that is kind of a backdrop in the idea that I have in formulating this here is self-interest. I don't necessarily mean that as a negative term. I just recognize it as a human nature motivational factor. People are interested in themselves. Why do you eat? Why do you go to work? Etc. There's a need to have self-interest. And from the standpoint, especially given the explanation you just gave about Jesus and the money changers, I can really see how the people who were profiting from those money changers inside the temple, presumably the clergy, the high priest at the time, not just lost that stream of revenue, but they also got publicly shamed. And I have found, being with many, many wealthy people, that the publicly shamed part is normally more than the money part. And I think there's a human nature element to that. And I can see that having a desire to lead a backlash against him. But I do not see the straight line connection for the populace turning within a couple of days. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about here today, Father, is how can people go from one extreme to the other extreme so quickly? And what does that say about us potentially being one of those people here today?
Yeah, it's an important observation, and it's often made. It comes out so strongly in the Palm Sunday Mass, in particular, where we start the Mass with that Gospel of the Triumphal Entry, and then we end the Mass with the Gospel of the Passion narrative and the crucifixion of Jesus. And so it comes out very strongly, that contrast between the Hail Hosanna to the Son of David, and then the crucify him of the crowds. It's not entirely clear that it's the same crowd is one thing to keep in mind. There were a ton of people in Jerusalem for the Passover. So you could have some massive crowds that recognize him and receive him, and some massive crowds that are ready to crucify him. So it's not entirely clear that that's the same group of people and that they've turned in the course of a week. For one thing.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that real quick before you? I get that the individuals might be different, but it's not like they were oblivious to what happened on Good Friday. I mean, it took an entire open court and then him walking through the streets with a cross on his back. Like, it's not like people wouldn't have heard about it and had a chance to do something about it.
So why didn't the crowd that raised up to hail him as Hosanna, Son of David, stand against the crucifixion?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. I mean, each individual at some point went from, yeah, I'm on the bus of you or the Messiah to, I'm going to let this happen. I'm not going to say anything. Goes back to some of the examples we probably said in the last episode, but that is
Well,
as
we
I
see it
thought.
most clearly in the apostles, right? I mean, they had dedicated 3 years of their lives to him, and they all fled. So the Romans were fearful and uh, terrifying. And again, we talked a bit about the Nazi regime in our last episode. I mean, the horrific things, you see the man you thought was king ripped to shreds, and you don't want to be next. I I think that's pretty understandable myself.
When you say it
I'm
like that, that seems pretty obvious of that.
so anyway, I'm not diminishing your observation, but just to say, that's the space that we're in, and so then it calls for some levels of heroism. But one of the things that Pope Benedict points out, I reference him a couple of times, and he has the whole series on Jesus of Nazareth, his public ministry, his life in one volume, and then Holy Week is and Easter basically are the second volume, and then he wrote a third volume on the infancy narratives. But that Holy Week and Easter volume brings out a number of really interesting things to delve into some of these passages in pretty deep ways. But the people who hailed him and welcomed him um, were not the power figures, because he didn't present himself as a power figure. So it was generally the poor, the little ones. He celebrates at one point, "You have hidden these things from the wise and the learned and revealed them to the merest of children." It wasn't the powerful of this world who had eyes to see and who recognized him for who he was. And he didn't come in as a power figure to overcome all of the Roman governors. He spoke truth, and truth had its own power, and he had courage, which made him also appear powerful. He wasn't intimidated, and so people found some refuge and strength in him. But at the end of the day, he never picked up a weapon. He never organized an army. He never had a strategy. He never uh, infiltrated and undermined. And he was himself living out in front of people, which is why when he was questioned, they say, whatever, this and that. And he said, "Everything I've done in the open. Ask anybody. Like, you don't need to question me." And that's the truth. He was living in front of people, proclaiming truth, which again had its own convicting force. It resonated in the hearts of those who weren't already corrupt and closed and hardened. And so, but that's often the little ones. That's the ones who haven't already been caught up in power structures that they're afraid to lose, and in money that they don't want to let go of, in pleasures that they don't want to give up, or in honors that they aren't clinging to. And so those who are already free of those great idols are the ones who are more likely to recognize him. As a result, they didn't have the money to defend him or the power to stand up for him. We get a glimpse. Nicodemus is willing to say some things, or sort of, but mostly by night. Joseph of Arimathea actually gives him his own unhewn, unused tomb, and is willing to intervene to take him down from the cross. But the voices of power, of religious power, and there was basically no, well, the secular power was also limited. Um, what's her face? The Joanna, the wife of Chusa, who was Herod's steward. I mean, there were some people, some women, some people with some money who were able to provide some things. They did it somewhat covertly, but there was no organized structure to defend him. And so when the Roman army that conquered Jerusalem against the Jewish army, when they're rising up to arrest him, to beat him, to bring him to the cross, there's nobody that's like going to stand up and revolt against that. They didn't have that kind of structure, and they weren't leading that kind of resistance. Simon the Zealot would have been another. The Zealots actually had a bit more of an armed resistance, but Simon had learned over those years to separate himself from some of those movements. and had chosen a path of peaceful resistance, of adherence to the truth. And so anyway, the um, by the time that we're getting to the place of crucify him, again, as we talked about in the last episode, how many of those people were really into crucifying him? Most of them didn't know who he was. They're going along with the crowd. Groupthink is really persuasive, and that kind of corrupting influence catches a lot of people up in its wake. And so um, I doubt it was people who said Hosanna to the Son of David and hailed his triumphal entry that were also shouting crucify him, but they were shaken, they were afraid, and then they were shaken. They thought he was the Messiah, and now he's showing no resistance, and he's just going to be destroyed. So, like, what does that even mean? Resurrection wasn't a possibility in anybody's mind, and so suddenly it's like I'm backing the wrong candidate. I guess I'm just going to kind of hide and hope I don't get caught up in this. And then other people who are just like along for a good show, like, yeah, that's great. People loved him. And I was kind of skeptical, and maybe some of them were guys like the money changers or related to them, or, just you know, like the showdown and want to see a political candidate go down, and so they're jeering along and see that that's the where the tide is flowing at this point. But that's all of our kind of human stuff. I mean, we are creatures that move with the pack. We are pack animals in so many ways, and it takes a lot to set out on a different path, and so it's a real challenge for us.
It's a very good point there, and something to really consider. And also, on the one hand, it was also kind of nice the way that you said that it was ultimately self-interest what was guiding them. And I think self-interest is probably one of the things that lead you into groupthink more than anything else. You went through very well the loss of pleasure, stature, income, whatever the case might be. The perks are really, really frightening for people to let go, and how much they will allow someone else to suffer just to keep their status and all the other things that come with that. And that's certainly one of the things that Jesus points out. Yeah, I even explicitly got that part. So that's that's a very good thing there. And your notion there of them now being the 11 other apostles, or I guess the 10 other apostles, that run away from Jesus and don't want to get involved, I guess is a further testament to it of hiding from it, because you can see throughout the ministry that Jesus has in the Bibles that he is against the Pharisees and the scribes a lot. And there is an animosity that eventually leads in setting him up for death between the two groups. And it's effectively, at the end of the day, he's telling them they're doing it wrong. And he uses a lot of different examples and parables to show that. But he's saying how they are, concluding this analogy, acting in their own self-interest instead of acting in the interest of God. They're looking through their own eyes instead of being able to see what's God's trying to teach, which I think is the whole point of him talking about the beam sticking through your eye and you're caring about the splinter in someone else's. I think that's the direct reference he's trying to make right there. And you can see how the powerful of the day are not going to like that. No one loses and goes down quietly. I mean, it's very rare when you see corporate structures like that or political structures like that accept that. And it's kind of interesting how you've used the analogy before of the Bible kind of comes full and circle back inside of it, and this is an example of that, where Jesus is showing you have to look through God's eyes, but that's also something that's like really impossible for anyone else to do because we're not God. So I guess that would be part of the thought process of this episode, would be how to see ourselves so we don't get caught up in the groupthink. And if there's any teachings you have, Father, of how to keep us from falling into that trap.
Yeah, it's, I think, really, really important. And again, I hope my lack of judgment comes through clearly in all of this. You know, I appreciate Jordan Peterson's observation. You know, it is the rare person who stands against the juggernaut of public opinion and the crowds and power figures. You know, it's the rare person that resists, and that's why we celebrate them. And I think that's the way to help ourselves as much as possible. You know, move in the direction of becoming the rare person, is celebrating the resistance, celebrating those who were able to see and stand against the forces. And that happened in different ways, you know, and for some it was outspoken. For others, it was a hidden resistance. You know, there were so many who hid Jews. There were lots who gave them baptismal certificates to, you know, help them hide as Christians. There were those who aligned themselves, even, you know, took a bullet for them or something. But there were others who continued to speak and to publish. So I think celebrating the resistance and acknowledging where it was possible, without needing to condemn those who gave into the powerful forces, is one aspect. I think reading the gospel, you know, what we do at Sunday Mass and what we do on a regular basis to expose ourselves to the pure truth that is presented by Jesus, to the highest moral standards. It's so dangerous for us to start rationalizing a lot of things, to start ignoring certain statements, to take things less seriously. And I think we have to have the courage to keep challenging ourselves and challenging each other. We don't want to oversimplify things either. You know, I'm not encouraging anybody to cut off their hands and pluck out their eyes and things like that. There are things that shouldn't be taken literally. But sometimes there are things that should be, and we don't. And so we have to be not so quick to dismiss things, to dismiss hard words, but to really let the scriptures speak to us, to let the Lord speak to us, to keep our connection with him, and then to be there with each other. The more that we can surround ourselves by good people, people who have high integrity, people who do stand against corrupt forces, people who are willing to make sacrifices, people who are upholding the highest standards. Those are the people that we want to surround ourselves with. And then we won't get used to the putrid air of corruption, and we'll continue to expose ourselves to the sweet and fresh air of truth and goodness.
And what a beautiful message to end with, and something that we can all take to heart and convert into action within our worlds. So we thank you all for listening, and we will be with you again next week.